Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to use joins and relates to attach external information to your feature classes in ArcMap so that you can use it to analyze and symbolize your data. You'll notice that in this lesson, we're back to our trusty rivers and watersheds data again. So remember when we worked with spatial joins and I mentioned how spatial joins are a specific type of join where we attach data based upon their relationship in space? In this case, we're doing a table join, where we attach data from one table to another when they share the same value in an attribute in each table, and we specify the field in each table that we use for the matching. In this lecture, we're going to focus on how to actually do the attaching of the data in ArcMap here. But in a lecture in the next class, I'll show you how to structure your own data tables so that you can prepare them to be able to be joined in with ArcGIS. The first question many of you will probably have is, why would I want to join in data? In what case will I need data that's not already in my attribute table? I'm just going to go collect data on my GPS and I'll enter the information I need right there or something like that. Well, there are lots of cases where you might want to be able to join in data. So, for example, joining in data allows us to separate our data in appropriate ways that makes each component more reusable. The simplest data separation is when you might have hundreds or thousands of attributes for each feature. You might instead want to group it by themes into different tables and attach that data in only when you need it so that the attribute table is easier to work with. This would be in a use case like what we work with the census data, with that population data I showed in a previous lesson. There's just tons and tons of data to attach at the county level and at the census tract level, and it would be really unwieldy and huge to try to download all of it at once. Another example would be if you have a data set that you downloaded from one party and then a third party created some attributes to attach that add value to your analysis. An example of this is these rivers right here, which is what I'm going to show you. These rivers are from a data set called NHD, the National Hydrography data set. But that upstream area attribute that I've been using so much in our demonstrations, that's an attribute from a third party. It's part of the NHD Plus, where they ran a bunch of different analyses on rivers all across the US and produced many different attribute tables that you can attach in to add additional value in your analysis. So let's do that join. You could see here I have the cumulative area table. That's the table from NHD Plus in my map document, and then I have my rivers layer here. You'll also maybe notice that the table of contents doesn't look like it usually does. That's over here, and this is because this is the drawing order version of the table of contents. Here we have the list by source version of the table of contents, and it kicks in when we add tables in because tables don't have a drawing order, so it wants to show them to us by default. You can switch back to drawing order, but for now we'd like to view them in the list data by source view. Doing a join in ArcGIS is relatively easy. All I need to do is right click on the features I want to attach attributes to and go to joins and relates and then join. And I get a dialog here, and I can join attributes from a table. And I can also do a spatial join right here. In practice, I almost always use the geoprocessing tool to do it instead, but just a note. One thing I want to point out is that ArcMap tries to be, I think, a little too helpful here, and a lot of students of mine tend to get into trouble because Arc suggests tables and values for you. So if you're rushing through it, you may end up with a bad join because you didn't select one of these parameters correctly. So take it slow and pay attention to what you're doing when you're joining data. So the first thing I do want to do is select the table to join to this layer. So it is the cumulative area table, and so I'll leave that selected. And then I need to select the common field that's present in my feature data to initiate the join. So that's COM_ID in this case. They both will have the information that's in that field. If it helps to conceptualize it, COM_ID stands for Common Identifier, and it's across the NHD data set. They use this COM_ID to identify attributes and features that match each other. So here's one of those cases of ArcMap being a little too helpful. It selects a field in my table now that matches the same data type as COM_ID. COM_ID is an integer, so it gives me integer attributes in the cumulative area table that I can join, but it selects one by default for me. So students I have when they're rushing through just leave OID selected and click OK, and then they don't get any matching records. In this case, it's really easy. COM_ID is the field that we actually want to join to. In practice, they don't have to have the same name, and they often won't, as I'll tell you in the next class. But in this case, it's really easy because we're matching COM ID to COM ID. And then the last thing is some join options. We can either keep all the records regardless of whether they successfully join, or only keep the records that actually receive a join. Sometimes it's really useful if you have a table coming in. Maybe that's the only information you want to pay attention to, is the information in the table that actually matches features in your data set. So if I click keep only matching records, that would tell me. One thing that helps if you do think you might get yourself into trouble rushing through is to click validate join. And it's going to check everything and make sure that the number of records match and a couple of other checks in the data sets. And it'll tell me if I might have messed up. And this is a good example. It did mostly validate, but it's warning me that I don't have the same number of records matching in each one. That's okay in this instance. We don't necessarily have attributes for all of these, but we're going to continue anyway. So I'll click OK. It's going to make the join, and I see no outward-facing difference in my data set right now. But if I right-click on my attribute table and go to Open Attribute Table, it looks pretty typical in this case. But if I go to the right, I'll see those two attributes there. And if I right-click on one of them and go to Properties, I'll see its full name, which is prefixed by the table name, cumulative area dot total drainage area square kilometers here. So I can click OK and close it out. And just to prove that it was a join and that that information wasn't there, we're going to now remove the join, and then we'll come take a look at the attribute table again. So if you're done with the join and you want to remove it, you can right-click on it, go to Joins and Relates, Remove Joins, and click on the join you want to remove. And if I go back and look at the attribute table, I'll see it's not there anymore. I'm going to just really quickly add that same join back, though, because I want to show you something else. So COM ID matching to COM ID on the cumulative area table, keeping all records. Okay. So we have our join on this table. We can see those records here. But then if I close that out, here's another copy of the same data here. This is the rivers layer that I didn't initiate the join on. And the join is just in this map document. The join is not actually attaching information to the underlying feature data on my hard drive right now. It's not editing the data in the geodatabase. Instead, it's just making that connection in this map document for this map. A new map document with that data would not have the join. And in fact, this rivers layer will not have the join, even though it's the same data, because I didn't join it to this copy of the rivers. So we saw that the other rivers layer had the join. This one will not. Switch out to selection mode. And if I go to the end of the table, no join. So that just shows that it's specific to the layer in the map document and not going all the way down to the actual underlying data. Now, let's just do one more join here. I'm going to remove this join one more time, and we're going to go try to add it back, but this time we're going to do it wrong because I want to show you how you know when you mess up a join. So if I go to COM ID here and then leave it as OID in this case, because that'll be incorrect, and keep all records, I'll click OK. And it still looks like it did before, right? All the features show up. But if I go to the attribute table and go to the end, all of these end up being null values. I mean, occasionally you might get an accidental match or something, but in this case, they're all null values. So if you find yourself joining data and ending up with null values, you probably mismatched your fields. You didn't get the common identifier right. And that's a really common problem that people new to joins and relates have. To fix it, remove the join, and then go look up in whatever data you're working with documentation what the common identifier field is, if that documentation is available. So the last thing I'm going to do is show you how to deal with it when you have multiple records you want to attach to a single feature record. That's not just a straight join in ArcGIS. So let's turn off the rivers layers here, but we'll leave the watershed boundary layer visible, and I'm going to make it fully opaque now. And right here, this main.observations table, I have a bunch of records of fish species occurrence in each watershed. And so a watershed may have thousands of records of a fish species in it, or it may have 0. And what we want to do is we want to attach that information so it's usable in ArcGIS and browsable here. So what I need to do instead in Arc is I do a relate. And a relate does what we call a one-to-many join. We have one feature joining to many records in the foreign table, the main.observations table. And the setup is really similar though. I still need to select the table that we're joining to it, and I need to select the fields that they have in common. In this case, they have the HUC12 information in common, and this first feature data has a HUC12 field, but the main.observations table doesn't have a HUC12 field. And so I have to know in this case that the zone ID field is what has the HUC12 information. It has the common information that we can relate to the HUC12 field in the WBD subwatershed table. So now I need to give it a name, and I'll give it a species occurrence. And I'll click OK. And if I open up the attribute table, what'll be immediately alarming is I don't have any additional information at this point that I didn't have before. And that always gets me for a moment with relates. And then I remember that it doesn't append the records for a relate to the end because it would have to duplicate all of these, right? Instead, when we want to see related information, what we should do is we'll do a selection of HUC12s. So I'll just select one right now. And then I'll come back over here and I'll look at that one record. And then when I want to see related information, I'll go up here to the related tables option and I'll click on the related table, and it will then show me all of the related information to that selected HUC12, that selected watershed. And I can see everything in that table that is connected through the relate. And they all indeed have the same zone ID here, the same HUC12 ID. Okay, that's all we're going to talk about in this lecture. If you want to learn more about joins and relates and managing your data, you should take the next class because we'll go into much more detail about it. That may initially sound a little boring, but it's going to allow you to do much more powerful things with your GIS data because you can incorporate so much additional third-party data and you can develop your own complex data sets with it. In this lesson, I showed you how to join data to your existing feature data from a third-party table, either using a join or a relate in ArcMap. And this allows you to bring in third-party data or lots of additional attributes or separate your own data using best practices. In the next lecture, I'll show you how to troubleshoot the kinds of problems you might encounter when doing geoprocessing operations or working in ArcMap. As a technical profession, you will encounter problems working with GIS, but if you know how to deal with them, if you know how to search out and find solutions to your problems, you're going to be able to work just fine with it. So that's what we're going to cover in the next lecture. See you there.